In question one, we are asked what the price level is, and if the price level is higher in one country than another, what does it tell us about the standard of living in that country? We define the price level as a quantity that represents the average price in a basket of goods. Assuming that both countries have the same basket of goods, a country with a higher price level means that they have a higher money supply in that country, meaning that their currency is probably less than the other countries, meaning that their standard of living is lower. In question two, we are asked what are some of the forces that can cause shocks to the velocity of money. In Peru's law, we're given the quantity formula, which states that money supply times velocity of money should be equal to the price level times the real GDP. Looking at that equation and also looking at the growth rate equation, where the growth rate of m plus v, growth rate of v is equal to the growth rate of p plus the growth rate of y, we can say that the price level, real GDP, as well as the money supply, can potentially affect the velocity of money, assuming that the price level, assuming that the money supply times the velocity of money is equal to the real GDP times the price level. In question three, we're asked what's probably a bigger problem: a steady rate of inflation of 15% or a rate of inflation that varies unexpectedly year to year from 0 to 15, so that the average, the rate is well below 15, and why? Ideally, when inflation is happening, you want to predict it so that you can adjust the prices or adjust the interest rate to accommodate for that. When it's unexpectedly adjusting year to year from 0 to 15%, you can make various miscalculations that can lead to disasters, that can lead to loss of money. And so we would hope for inflation that's steadily as we can predict it, and it will minimize deadweight loss. If we have unpredictable shifts, then it will cause more economic efficiency, and people can misinterpret market signals. Money could be lost, and opportunities could be lost as well. So, to answer to that problem is the bigger problem is if the rate of inflation is unexpectedly running.
In question 4, we're asked who is helped more by surprise inflation, borrowers or lenders? Now, since the amount of currency the borrowers owe stays the same while the actual value of their money goes down, the borrower is helped more in this situation. Question 5 is somewhat similar. Would people with mortgages or bank owners be more likely to lobby the government for fast money growth? And again, people with mortgages are going to lobby for this because their mortgage amount stays the same while the value of the mortgage decreases as the money supply grows. In question 6, we're looking at the relationship between expected inflation and the tax system. Expecting high inflation discourages saving because that money is depreciating in value if it's in savings, while investing the money, even if it's more risky, has a much better chance of actually increasing the value. And for short-term tax revenue, the government will use higher inflation. Moving to question 7, the real interest rate is what tells us more about how many goods and services can be bought next year with savings, while what's focused on in the media is usually the nominal interest rate. And question 8 is really just the definition of the Fisher effect, which tells us that the biggest effect on expected inflation is going to be on nominal interest rates, not real ones. And finally, for question 9, we're calculating inflation by subtracting the earlier price from the later one and dividing by the former. So we end up with inflation rates of 10%, 20%, and 1%.
Question 10. According to the quantity theory of money, in the long run, the product of m times v is the same as p times y. So we multiplied m times v for each set and divided that by y to find the value of p. We got 15, 20, and 10. For question 11, we're looking at some more theoretical cases with the quantity theory of money. In this case, let's say the supply of money doubles. What happens to the price level? Well, the price level also doubles. It goes to 200% of the original, and the GDP stays at its original level because comparatively, GDP and velocity of money are relatively constant compared to supply and price levels. For question 12, we're analyzing news headlines and how they relate to the quantity theory of money. Part A could be restated as the money supply fell in 2015. Part B is another way of saying the velocity of money is increasing. In part C, price of most consumer goods rose 12%, price level has increased by approximately 12%. Workers produce 4% more output per hour. So real GDP increased by 4% last year. Real GDP increased 32% in the last decade. That's almost a statement that you could make, but GDP is calculated yearly, so we would say 3.2% each year increase. Interest rates fell, consumers hold more cash. That's an increase in the supply of money. Question 13. Inflation is the cruelest tax. We said it affected groups A, B, and C, and did not affect groups D and E. People who hold currency and coins are affected by inflation. Businesses that hold currency and coins are affected by inflation. People who keep deposits in a checking account that pays 0 interest are affected by inflation because their money becomes worth less. Now, if they're in a savings account that pays an interest rate higher than the rate of inflation, it's not going to harm them because their interest already makes up for the rate of inflation. If they invest in gold, silver, platinum, or other metals, which are not related to currency or they're not as liquid, then inflation doesn't touch them. All right, in question 14, we're looking at similarities and differences between monetizing the debt in a country with hyperinflation and counterfeiting. In a lot of ways, these are the same thing because they're printing a ton of money that's going to have adverse effects in the economy, decrease the value and strength of the dollar. But obviously, counterfeiting money is different from monetizing the debt in that monetizing the debt is a legal process. It's initiated by the leader of the country, and it's often used to make up for a cycle of economic downturn. Counterfeiting money is used for the benefit of a few, but it hurts everyone. Monetizing the debt hurts everyone ultimately, but that's not the goal.
So question 15 gives us a good explanation on the equation of Fisher effect, which is nominal interest rate is equal to expected inflation rate plus our equilibrium, where our equilibrium is the equilibrium real rate of return. So if we apply that to our question here, we know that if there is one unknown in the equation and we know the other two, we can just use algebraic calculation to acquire our unknown. So on the right here, we use the equation. We have 4% as the second row, our equilibrium. We have negative 3% for E pi, I for 12% for I, 4% for E pi, and then 2% for R. For question 16, we're again using the Frit economic database, and here we're looking at CPI, or Consumer Price Index. Using the annual feature, we see that the CPI in 1990 was 130.658, while in 2010 it has risen to 218.076. And so the total inflation rate over this 2-decade period was 40.09%. Question 17, we first have to refer back to our textbook and to look at the equation R real is equal to E pi minus pi plus R equilibrium. So in this case, if E pi is smaller than pi, the expected inflation rate is smaller than the real inflation rate, and that's where wealth flows from the lenders to the borrowers. And so if we look at the first row here, E pi is smaller than pi, we know that the wealth is flowing from the lenders to the borrowers, and so the borrowers, in a sense, mortgage holders, are benefiting the most, and the banks are hurt the most. If we apply the same principle for the next few rows, these are what we get. And then for the last one, we see that E pi is equal to pi, and in this case, real return is equal to equilibrium return, and that means neither side gets hurt. All right, if we go on to question 18, we're going to use the calculations provided by the question, where the nominal after-tax return is equal to 2/3 of the nominal interest rate. And here we see that as expected inflation rises to a surprisingly high number, the real after-tax return plummets. And it makes sense when we think about it in the real world that people will have less incentive to save when they expect high inflation because their currency, what they save, may depreciate in the future.